Do you struggle with muddy, overworked paintings? Are you unsure how you end up there? Let's see if we can work it out together. Hi, I'm Jackie Smurd and this is Dunnock Studio, and today we're going to look at how to avoid muddy watercolours. Let's get into it. First of all, I've dampened the paper just with some clean water, and all I'm using is ultramarine blue. So the first one I'm going to put on just a simple wash. Just going to reload my brush, go backwards and forwards across here. I've got no other colours mixed in with this. Going to get a little bit of movement because it's damp underneath. Go. And the paper is a practice paper from Bromley's Art. It's got some slight tooth to it, so you can see the paint is beginning to granulate. Ultramarine blue does tend to do that. So now let's do exactly the same thing over here. This time I'm going to put it on just as I did before. It's very windy outside, so you might hear some banging outside the studio. Apologies for that. I was going to go out and tie it all down, but it's way too windy now, so I'll have to just manage. So the paper's slightly drier there. Now, this one is one wash. I've left it alone. This is what sometimes makes your paintings muddy. You've got a wash on, and then you go back in. Now, it's not too bad because this is still quite damp. But I've just gone back in and I'm just going over and over this area. I just want to make sure I get that paint where I want it. This is also known as licking the canvas or licking the paper. You just can't help yourself. We've all done it at some point. So I've gone over that 3 or 4 times and I'm now going to leave it. Simple wash, untouched, wash, gone over several times. The second wash, again, dampen the paper here and here, and this time I have mixed some ultramarine blue and some yellow together, and I'm mixing that in the palette there. So I've completely mixed it in. I'm going to pop that on. It's a little bit weaker than the last wash was. So I'm just laying that on. Now this isn't itself a muddy mix because it's just 2 colours. Because I've mixed it already in the palette, it's what I would call flat and boring. So this time I'm going to pick up the yellow and pop that over here. This one's slightly dried again. See if we can do it quickly enough. So yellow wash. Now I'm going to pick up my blue. Whilst this is still damp, I could just add that blue in. Now of course I'm going over the wash already on there, so this is technically muddying up the yellow a little bit, but because it's damp you can see that the 2 colours are mixing together in the damp wash, and that can create a nice interesting green rather than a flat green. Can you see how different they are? Let's go back to the concept of mud again. So mud, you could say, is an actual colour. Mud is brown. If you put all your primary colours together, so here we've got some yellow, there's 2 yellows on here, a warm and a cool yellow, a blue and a red. So first of all, let's make green. Still quite a nice clean colour. That's the 2 primaries, blue and yellow. When I start adding the 3rd primary in, red, you can see straight away it goes grey. Now some people would call that mud, and the more red you put into it, the warmer it goes, the browner it goes. So like a warm brown, could even push that a bit more. There we go, you can just see that's warm brown. And of course, the more blue you put into it, the cooler it goes. So you can pull the grey back into a blue grey. So mixing your own greys or mud is quite useful in paintings. So is that what we're talking about when we say our paintings are muddy? Well, it can be if you have all the colours on your palette all going on at the same time. Everything will end up grey and you won't have any clean colours. So making greys and dulled down mixes is very useful for your paintings, but if your whole painting is like that, you have to be careful it doesn't turn to mud. But is that the reason for mud? Well, let's see what happens if we put this grey onto the paper. So I'm just going to pick up the warm grey. I haven't dampened this. Let's see what this looks like. Quite a weak one. It gives you the idea. There's a warm grey. Now I'll do exactly the same thing, but this time I'm going to pull some blue back into it, making sure I try and keep it neutral. We don't want it to be completely blue. So I've now pulled some blue back in. Just want to get it a little bit grayer, so let's pull some yellow in. A little bit of red. This is a great way of using up waste paints, is you just mix them all together and make yourself some sort of grey. So that one looks a little bit bluer than the last one. Let's see. There we go. Nice and blue. You might not be able to see this as well as I can. So we've got two different greys, a warm and a cool one. Now they in themselves are not muddy. They're actually quite interesting colours and really, really nice to set off a bright colour. So if they dry, you can then pop a bright colour next to them. It makes the bright colour sing and look much, much brighter than if you have lots of bright colours around it. So we've made some greys, but yes, you could argue they're muddy, but is that what we mean by muddy colours? Don't ever forget the muddy water in your pot for cleaning your brushes can muddy your colours. So what I do is keep a separate pot of clean water with a pipette or a clean brush to take water out and drop into my paints. Therefore I never mix this water back into my paint palette. Right, let's see if I can make you a muddy colour. So I have got my three primaries, and they're warm primaries: cadmium yellow, cadmium red and ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is a warm blue because it has slightly leaning towards the red. It's slightly violet in colour. So to start with, I'm just going to paint a little circle of the yellow and just fill that in. This is not wet first, and then I'm going to let that dry completely before I add one of the other primaries. Remember, three primaries together make a grey. This is now completely dry, and we're now going to go on to the cadmium red. If you find your paints are starting to dry in your palette, don't forget the good friendly spray bottle. You can use any spray bottle. This one is actually a Derwent spray bottle, which I find lasts really well, but you don't have to use that. Anything you've got that used to have something in the house you can use. So I'm picking up a nice brushful of cadmium red. I'm making sure that I load my brush properly. It's a nice, fairly soft watercolour brush. This is a Prolene Pro Art brush. and it's nice and full of paint. Now I'm going to very carefully overlap the yellow, so I'm glazing now, but I'm not going to quite overlap every part of it. I'll slightly make this circle slightly off to one side so you can see the yellow underneath. So I'm being very gentle as I put this paint on, because we're glazing over the top of the yellow, and although it's dry, if I rub hard with a brush or my brush is very stiff, I could theoretically lift the yellow underneath. I don't want to do that. I want a nice clean simple second wash, and as you can see, cadmium red over cadmium yellow produces an orange. And now going to let that dry completely as well. This is now completely dry. As a side note, I've used the trusty hairdryer, and you can see it's not dried very evenly. That's because I speeded it up using one of these. So if you can have patience to leave your watercolours alone for half an hour, you get a much nicer dry wash. It is quite a common thing for your hairdryer to speed things up and actually ruin the effect. Now today we're not worried about the effect because this is all about making mud. But just as a side note, that's a little bonus, is if you've got the patience to walk away and let it dry, that's the best thing you can do with watercolour. Now we're going on to our blue. So you can see it's dried up again. Just make sure it's moving in the palette. You want your puddle of paint. You do not want a sticky pile of paint. This is watercolour, so make sure it's got some movement in it. So I might even have a little drop more water. So there's my pipette of clean water, and I also do exactly the same into my palette. And this will help a little bit. If you put in dirty water onto your clean paints, you will end up with mud to start with. So there's my blue paint now moving happily around the palette. That's much better than when I started. So this is my third glaze. Now we have 2 primaries on here. Now this is going to be the third. So this is going to make a grey brown of some sort. So I'm going to overlap it slightly this way, just down this side. Again, I'm being very careful with my brush not to press hard, I'm trying not to drag that paint off that's underneath. It's all dry, so it should be okay, but I'm being extremely gentle. This layer is the third layer. It's a glaze. There's 2 layers underneath it. The trick is to not dislodge them. And there you go. So at that point, try and stop. You can see there is a little puddle there. So I've just squeezed my brush out, let the paint run to one side, and use a thirsty brush just to take some of the puddle off. Just squeeze your brush out. You don't need to dry it, just make it thirsty enough to pick up the excess. Then leave well alone, and yet again let that dry. You can see how dark that's gone. So your 3 beautiful bright primaries can create something really dark and interesting. So this one now needs to dry completely. Whilst that one is drying, I'm going to go back into my colours. We're going to do exactly the same thing again. However, this time I'm not going to wait long enough in between. So I'm just going to mix up my primaries, exactly the same colours, nothing has changed there. Making sure all my colours are rolling around the palette. Nice puddles of paint. Got a little blob on here, get rid of him. So, same thing again. Make sure my brush is not too wet when I start. First layer of paint, here goes my yellow, just like I did before, cadmium yellow. Now I can still leave this to dry. Just worked over it a little bit already, you can see the marks there, but nevertheless it's still a clean colour. Now what some people do at this point is throw the next layer straight on when it's still slightly damp. And obviously if it's really running wet, then it's just going to run everywhere. But this is almost dry, but it's not quite dry. So let me just show you. So now I'm going to go back in. I should have waited for this to dry because I'm glazing. So I'm going to put it back in. And then I'm going to just work on it a little bit. Because I want to make sure that layers on. It's not so wet that it's running everywhere off here, but it's definitely not dried completely underneath. So at that point I think, yeah, that's okay. Got that red on, lovely. Then I'm going to patiently wait before I put my blue on. I sit and I wait and I wait, and then I want to do something. So I'm just going to let the sheen go off a little bit more because I don't want my blue running across the page. Just let that settle. So it's almost dry, it's slightly damp, so this is as if I was being impatient. So now I'm going to go back in with my blue, and I'm going to pull that round. I'm going to make sure I get it everywhere. There we go, let's just work that in. I'm licking my paper again. I want to make sure I get this on properly. There we go. Get that round there. Oh, I might have missed a bit here. There we go. So that one can now settle. And let's do a final one. So we pop on the yellow. There we go. Each time I'm slightly overlapping these. Just see I just picked up a bit of contaminated paint there. Slightly dirty yellow, but I think we're okay just for this analysis. So now I'm going to not wait at all. On goes my red. Obviously it's going to spread more. Now even now as a beginner that I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, I probably would wait a little bit because it looks so wet, and if I just let that run together I know it will turn into something very strange. The only reason I'm using circles here is just to demonstrate it. It's not that you would necessarily be painting anything like this. So I probably, even as a beginner, I would stop and just wait for a minute now. Now I've waited long enough, I'm impatient, I've got things to do. So I'm going to come in with my blue, going to roll around here, going to really get that in there. And yeah, that's definitely going to work. It's going to make it nice and dark. Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, doesn't look very nice. Maybe if I push it around a bit more. Just lick my paper a few more times. Oh my goodness. And then I panic and stop. So let's leave them all to dry completely. I'll have a close look. So what do you think? The first one we layered 3 primaries, one on top of the other when they were completely dry, and we carefully layered without rubbing. So although it's a very dark grey, can you see the colours in there? So that central area has all 3 primaries. It's really rich and dark, which is what mixing the 3 primaries does. And it's not a particularly nice colour, but it's got stuff going on. Looks quite interesting, doesn't it? And the second one, we didn't quite let it dry, and we put a little bit more pressure on the brush and we started to lick the paper. We went over a few more times, and you can see that there are some interesting colours, but it is duller than this one, is more vibrant. And then the third one, we didn't let it dry really at all because we were too impatient. We threw our colours in together and we stirred them like a mud kitchen. And then you can probably see that the colour is not nice. And you probably would relegate that to the muck on your palette type of grey. So in all honesty, The most common reason for muddy paintings is you keep mixing into your damp washes. This doesn't just apply to watercolour. If you lay thick paint onto oils or acrylic and it's not dry and you keep pushing your brush around, you will muddy your colours. Muddy paintings are a result of overworking, going back in when you don't need to. So keep your glazes simple, clean, and very light touch when you're glazing one colour on top of another. Try and think about the weight of your brush, how much pressure you put on it, because if you push hard you start lifting the colours underneath, therefore making a soup, and if you do it really well you end up with a mud pie, which is not particularly pleasant. Going back to our original wash, a single wash of blue will give you really interesting effects in the paper, whereas if you mess around with it and go over it a few more times, you lose these effects. You can see it's a lot flatter, less interesting than the one on the left. Down here we pre-mixed a green in a palette. It's okay. On this one we mixed it wet in wet on the paper, giving a much more interesting effect. Whether you like it better that way or not is personal preference. And then down here we made our own greys, and greys are useful in paintings, they really are. They make something else pop out, so that doesn't make your painting muddy. You can see these are interesting greys. We've mixed them ourselves out of the same colours we've used on everything else, and they're quite interesting to look at, quite nice. That's a warm pinky grey and that's a bluey grey. Nothing wrong with a grey, it's a beautiful way to set off brighter colours. If you don't want to overwork and you don't want to create mud, put your paint down and leave it alone. My best friend will always say to me, "Jackie, stop fiddling." So I put the brush down and go and make a cup of tea. Watercolours are so interesting, aren't they? And they do wonderful things, but sometimes if you mess with them too much, as with any other medium, you can blur it all together. And remember, 3 primary colours make a browny muddy colour. That isn't the only reason why it gets muddy, but it's one of the reasons. If you want clean, pure colours next to each other on your painting, be sure not to overwork them. Don't go back in and fiddle. Try and leave them be. I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all your views and comments, so please keep going with those, and do ask any questions you'd like to know more about something. Let me know. So until the next video, I'll see you soon. Happy painting and happy pure colour paintings, no more mud. Bye for now.